Hi everyone, it's really nice to see you all. I hope everyone's well and enjoying some of the spring sunshine, even if it's a bit chilly. We have a exciting agenda today. We're looking forward to hearing from our speakers, but also hearing your thoughts and comments too. So first up we have Louise Marix Evans from Quantum, who's done some fantastic work in the last few months with the Committee on Climate Change and is now doing some follow-on work with UK100 or a related project. First is Louise, and then after that we have 2 or 3 other presentations which we're looking forward to, but we'll have a chance to talk to Louise and interact and ask questions after her presentation. So Louise, can we kick off and hand over to you?
Thanks, Andy. Let me share my screen. There's always a delay when you do this. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. So this is me. Yeah, I'm with Quantum Strategy and Technology, which is a tiny 2-person sustainability consultancy. And last year I was contracted to work with the Committee on Climate Change, because I've done a lot of work with local authorities, particularly Greater Manchester, over the years on climate change. And I wrote the report, which I'll show you. Oops. Yeah, I prepared and wrote the report on local authorities and the 6th carbon budget. So I'm going to whiz you through that, and then I'm going to get onto the framework project that we're doing with UK100. So this report looked at the role of local authorities in meeting and being part of meeting the 6th carbon budget. And it really concluded that you can do so much with top-down policies, but as we all know, because that's what your network's all about, you've got to have regional and local action. So we looked at why local delivery matters, and you might have seen the nice CCC pie chart. Over half our emissions cuts rely on our behaviour, our purchasing decisions on our behaviour made by individuals, businesses and organisations. And that's not just pure behaviour change, that's quite a small proportion. So that relies on having infrastructure, systems, information and local skills and supply chains in place to make those low carbon or net zero carbon decisions. And that is a very local thing, focused on transport decisions, on our homes. I'm sitting here in a cold stone house with very heavy curtains. So we need to act at a local level on these kinds of things. It can't just be done top down like we've done the energy system beginnings of decarbonisation. And I think the COVID crisis has strengthened people's resolve to deliver and to see what's possible at a local level. And that seems to be staying as far as local authorities are concerned. And then I looked at how things all fit together, which they don't really. I spent a lot of wakeful nights trying to wonder why I didn't understand this. Then I realised it doesn't fit together properly. So we've got the sort of government, the subnational, then we've got a lot of different regional actors who their maps don't always align with local authorities. We've got different devolution deals, and then we've got a plethora of local authorities and councils. And then I didn't even go near the bottom layer of this chart, which is 10,000 local councils, which cover, I think, a third of the population, and which have got a critical role. Centre for Sustainable Energy is doing some really good work with local parish councils, actually. So I began to look at the policies that cascade through and what the bottom-up policies are as well. And then we looked at those spheres of influence. So strictly speaking, a local authority is only directly responsible for less than 2, maybe up to 5% of local area emissions through their own actual emissions that they're are under their direct control, and through procurement, commissioning, and then commercialisation. But that gets much bigger. Much bigger as you move out through these concentric circles, through their place shaping roles, through transport, planning policies, through the sort of innovation and demonstration work that they do, which can kickstart and de-risk investment. And UK100 have done work around the potential energy investment that can be made at that very local level. And then critically, and where they do the most successfully, I think, and I think we see this through the PCAN climate commissions, is that big partnership role. And that's not always led by a local authority, it might be instigated by others, but working in partnership and bringing those anchor organisations, which are in systems together in that sort of wider pink circle, is absolutely vital. And local authorities are linchpins to those partnerships, I think. And then lastly, it's that critical role of engaging and involving and communicating with local people and businesses. And we've seen that through climate assemblies, your climate commissions and citizens' juries and so on. And I think when we did the work for Greater Manchester's Green Summit, there's this big fear of just throwing a question out there to people and saying, what do you want from a green carbon neutral city, in case you get the wrong answer back? And people came back with really sensible answers, and they know an awful lot about climate change and how systems work and what they need to take action, and also clearly what they'd like to still be able to do. And I think the Citizens' Assembly, the Climate Assembly for UK showed that. It's, you know, people did want to be able to fly, actually, not all the time, but some of the time, and, you know, for a treat or a holiday. And so we have to look at, you know, how we deal with that. So that was quite interesting. We came up with a figure of around 1/3 of emissions locally being under direct or indirect influence touched on by local authority policies. So sort of making the case that they need to be taken very seriously in policy making and heavily involved in that policy making. You'll have seen this map, and it's a nice map ESA produced. For the local authorities here, don't peer at it. The Irish ones, Northern Ireland ones, some are missing, and some, it just shows the own authority emissions as opposed to the local area. So it gives a kind of wrong picture. So it's just an example of what it looked like in February. But we see we've got a big range of dates, scopes and approaches taken by local authorities to the climate emergency. And not all call it an emergency or declared one. So Central Bedfordshire will be in there as not looking like they've declared one, but they have a great plan in place. Many are focusing on co-benefits and looking at a green recovery. What we found is data is a challenge to them. Reporting methods really vary, and capacity and skills have taken a big hit over the last 10 years. And so they need building back up again. And we also see some authorities really embedding net zero into council decision making, some quite exciting initiatives. Cornwall are leading with the donut economics approach. I think there's some other interesting decision making tools. Cambridgeshire have developed a shadow carbon price. Be interesting to see how that works. So we are seeing this embedding, and we're seeing increased levels of carbon literacy training coming along too. Then the report, I take sector by sector and I trawl through what needs to happen for local authorities and how far up the government policy is in terms of helping get them there. So I'm not going to rehearse that, but there are significant actions needed on buildings, transport, waste. I'd say in a way less so on power, which has been decarbonised, but importantly, local area energy plans and decisions about power as it relates to heating buildings is really vital. And there's a lot of work around what we do with the distribution network operators, and where we go with the whole hydrogen thing. You know, do we hang on? Will it be used for heat? We think perhaps not. They're only at a sort of top-up level. But I think a lot of local authorities are clinging on to that hydrogen idea as a silver bullet, which just puts off action, which is a bit of a problem. And then there's much more new area of land use change, forestry and agriculture. And I'll just do a plug for our Net Zero Rural report, which we've just done for UK100, looking at the obligations on rural local authorities, which in fact carry a really heavy load of how we're going to decarbonise our whole economy, because they've got the land and they've got the space for trees, agriculture, producing food, pressure through housing, and renewable energy. And how we juggle that is really important, and they are less resourced than our urban areas. So that's a scamper through this. The main recommendations to government were, though, let's have a framework that aligns and clarifies those regional roles, local roles, and that it should be developed collaboratively, not just dropped down without thought given to how it can be adjusted and flexed for different local conditions, and have ownership at that local level. It has to be sufficiently financed and funded. And I think increasingly local authorities want to be seen as a means for investment rather than just a sort of black hole which public funding goes into, but that they can catalyse investment, catalyse growth. And then it needs to be facilitated in that policies that contradict and fight with each other need to be aligned better. And we see this a lot around planning policy and housing targets. So we have areas with big ambitions to go net zero much faster on new developments, which are held back by viability arguments or housing targets. It's coming up in the local nature recovery strategy work that I'm doing actually with Greater Manchester, which is how does that align with planning? Planning policy is in flux. So you've got these sort of little interdepartmental fights that go on, which have got to be aligned, and hopefully the net zero strategy coming from government will begin to do that. So that's what the report covered, and there's more in the report. There's a YouTube with the report launch where we go into much more detail about that. I can put the link up. But then, so what do we do about this framework, really? That's all very nice. So the next thing is really what I'm working on now is what on earth does this framework look like? And this is a project that has got a good steering group. UK100 asked us to work on this. And so we'll be producing a nice diagram, hopefully, which will form part of a communique, which will come out in July. But there'll be a meaty report that sits behind it, covering all these things, everybody's roles, what we're aiming for the framework to deliver, the key areas that need to be in it and the key components that must be in it, and how we link it to the net zero strategy, which would be interesting because I don't know what's in that, and then a bunch of recommendations. I don't know what its status will be. You know, they might not take any notice of it, but hopefully they will. And the way I'm working on that is I'm taking my 3 pigs approach to it. So I'm going to start building up a framework, like what does a good framework look like? What needs to be in it? Based on all the work that went on last year from the Blueprint Coalition, from PCAN, my report, the National Audit Office is net zero. So they've got no end of work to go off for that. So I'll build a straw framework and then we'll huff and puff and see if we can break it. And it needs to be resilient to changes in politics, new technologies. It's got to be resilient and changeable, not changeable, but the basic structure has got to be good enough to last for, I don't know, 20, 25 years, ideally. So we'll try and break it, and then I'll redo it out of sticks, try that out in a workshop, and then make a brick version, which will be resilient. So I'm looking at a set of ingredients for what needs to go into it. This is really early thinking, this horrible, messy slide. So I'm thinking about the principles that need to be in it, what components it needs to include, kind of processes that will occur, how it's communicated or how communication works, and then how resourcing would work. And it won't just be policy, it'll have a pillar of policy, but it will have other things that make a house stand up or a framework stand up. I'm really at the moment at the stage of looking at other frameworks that work. I know we love to hate it, the National Planning Policy Framework, because it doesn't deliver on climate change properly, but it does have local flexibility and local ownership. So I'm looking at that. And I've been looking at the COVID contain framework as well, which has been used, and it clearly depicts who does what at what level, but it's had quite a lot of criticism from local government. So I'm working my way through and speaking to people I know who work in different areas, including education or nature-based work as well, just to say what works, what do they like, why does it work, so we can learn from that. So if you've got suggestions of policy frameworks or frameworks to deliver quite big things that you think work well, please put them in the chat, because I'll go away and have a look at them and work out what they're doing right. Some of the obstacles it needs to span or remove or withstand. Obviously, the sort of short-term political timescales we work within, changing political approaches just as you think you're getting somewhere, the minister might change or there might be an election. Changes in personnel as well, that can have an effect. And of course, near-time crises or other priorities. And then there's quite a lot of sort of bureaucratic rules and competing agendas. So those are some of the things I'm thinking of for that. Oh, hang on, I've lost a slide. I did something funny. Oh no, I didn't. No, I've done all my slides. Sorry, I thought I had an extra wise thing to say, but sadly not. So that's what I'm working on for this framework. And I'd really like, ask me some questions, but tell me what you'd like as well. Okay, Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Louise. That's great. And I think on behalf of all of us, thank you for that, all the hard work you put into that CCC report, which really did help and has pushed things forward. So that's been massively positive. And the new project looks amazing too. We'll be very interested to see that. But what do people think? What kind of national frameworks would best enable local action? What would we like to see? Perhaps if you have a question, you can, hang on, have we got the raise hand function in Zoom? I was muddled it up with. Yes, we have, under reactions. So is it Johnny at Manchester?
It is. Hi, Andy. Hi, all. Nice to see you. Louise, I thought that was fantastic. We've talked around that a little bit, but first time I've seen that slide deck. So, yeah, really useful and super supportive of the idea of a framework. I guess one of the things, whether we like it or not, certainly under this government, is that they, as well as some kind of a role for local authorities, they see a really strong role for the private sector as well. So I don't know whether that's potentially the subject for a separate project, but I think my view would be trying to articulate what the role for the private sector is as part of this framework it would certainly help to get the attention of this government. And I think it's just, it's a practical recognition of the fact that there is not going to be sufficient resource at the local level to deliver everything that this framework's going to set out. So knowing some of the private sector partners we've got in Manchester, for example, really want to get into this space, something that helps to define what their role could be would be really helpful. So yeah, thoughts on whether or not there's something about the private sector in here would be useful.
Jenny, thanks. That's definitely on the radar, because I mean, if you look at the CCC 6 carbon budget advice, it's clear that a lot of that investment is going to come from the private sector, and we need to work together. In fact, I could wave the book I'm reading at the moment. Ta-da! So that's all about, not just the government fixing broken markets, but it's about saying, where's the vision, what are we going to do to get there together? I mean, I'm obviously not going to just nick that whole book and shove it into a framework. I'm looking at lots of different things, but yeah, I think it's really important. We see it in Greater Manchester, don't we? We've got a range of private sector partners working on the mission-based kind of approach across the city region, just to see what we can do to tackle things together.
Yeah, and I think probably what we struggle with both in the public sector and the private sector is each side's not quite sure what it wants the other side's role to be. It knows there's got to be something done collaboratively, but yeah, I think if we're able to bring a bit more definition to what that relationship could and should be, that would certainly help to move things on in some cities.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Johnny. Richard, I think you're waving at me by the screen.
Yeah, yeah, really useful, Louise. What I'd be interested to know is I think it's important that there is some accountability at the central level, if you like. I mean, it's all very well setting these frameworks up, but you know, they have to be accountable to someone. And I think, you know, my concern is that, you know, they could just stay there and then not, you know, it has to evolve. There has to be a link centrally and what's going on locally. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. But yeah, I mean, and the points on, I think it's really important that the private sector and the public sector work together as part of the partnership. I mean, in Surrey, I think it's absolutely vital that that happens. So, yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Do you want to come back, Louise?
I'm busy scribbling it down, drawing a little diagram. Yeah, I mean, I think the accountability thing is important, isn't it? Because I mean, the government in a way is held accountable. It's got its Climate Change Act, and I'm looking at Adrian, who used to work for the CCC, and they're held accountable annually by the progress reports. And one of the things I grappled with in this is that there is not a duty, and there's very little reporting, or HECA reports maybe. We used to have reporting under our national indicators, which included climate indicators. And when we talked around the idea of bringing in a duty, which there is in Scotland under their Climate Change Act, and there's a duty, the Future Wellbeing of Generations Act in Wales. But for English and Northern Irish authorities, we don't have that. But when we talk about bringing a duty and reporting and greater accountability, I suppose reporting, local authorities fight with that idea of reporting back to government as if that's the boss, because they're accountable to local populations. But actually the lack of data reporting then means you've got a lack of data coming back out from government, which makes it harder to come up with your plans. So we're looking at the nature data, that's very true at the moment. I'm hunting around for that. So there's that tension, isn't there, between wanting to be, but that accountability tension exists, and I'll have to tackle it somehow. But I stepped back from saying I think there should be a duty brought in with enough resourcing for local authorities to have a duty to deliver on the Climate Change Act. But I think a bit of me wishes I'd said it, but anyway, I didn't. So yeah.
It's an interesting point, Louise, about the accountability, and in a way that feeling that local government may have to report back to national government kind of plays into a very top-down way of thinking about this. And it would be lovely to think that there would be, you know, multiple layers. And I think you were right in saying that maybe in the English context especially, there's a missing middle layer there in terms of regional coordination. And Paul Ennals is on the line from North East Climate Coalition. And our Yorkshire Climate Commission is also, in a way, designed to re-inject that middle layer in there and to enable that regional coordination. But it would be lovely to think there would be a kind of multi-layer system with bottom-up flows going into national government, and national government kind of listening and learning and fostering and celebrating, rather than having a kind of top-down approach, which is driven on, you know, the flow of authority down from national government to local government. Does that feature a lot in your thinking more broadly?
It features in it all the time, Andy. It's really intimidating looking at all of you lot. So there's all sorts of professors and people, and it's much easier doing it on the telephone. Yeah, I've been, you know, I could show you the horrendous bits of post-it notes and diagrams and flip charts that are kicking around, which so horrified people at when I showed it to Jason when I was at the CCC in London. I'm thinking about it loads, and that's why I'm speaking to lots of people too, because I somehow have ended up thinking about this, and lots of other people think about it too. So I'm looking at people like Regen, CSE, the CCC work. Yeah, and we're working with the steering group and sort of trying to bring lots of people in to talk about that and how it might work. And also conscious of not harping back, because I'm so ancient, of going, oh, why don't we just bring back the regional development agencies? It used to be so brilliant in the olden days. I mean, obviously something wasn't perfect then, but we did have quite good regional coordination back then, and we had some resource. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking about it. Oh, there's lots of hands up. I'll shut up.
I'm as ancient as you, and I think that yeah, a lot of babies were thrown out with the bathwater when the RDAs were closed down. But Jason, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you from another ancient person, myself, who's been around for quite a while. Thank you, Louise. Fantastic as always. One of the points I wanted to make, is Jason here from UK100, by the way, is I think your point, Louise, around partnership and shared responsibilities is really key here between local authorities, central government and business. And I suppose I just had a question for anyone. I think you did a really good job, Louise, at pulling out some of the things that a framework could do. But in our work supporting local authorities, we see, of course, resources and money coming up time and time again, which is critical, and there needs to be more support for net zero, ambitious action towards net zero by local authorities. But I was just wondering, what else do people think that a framework needs to allow local authorities to do that they can't do already? And I just wondered if anyone's got any ideas or thoughts specifically around that.
That's an interesting question, Jason.
I might venture a rough and probably not well thought through answer. I guess there's something about the framework needing to be able to facilitate whole system change in a way that current policy frameworks don't. So, if I'm thinking about policy that will help my schools be carbon neutral, I need to have policy that's happening exactly at the same time in the same area that also thinks about how people are getting to that school and every other element surrounding that place. So I think it needs to, and I think you're already doing this because it was kind of covered in the presentation, really allow policy to work in a place-based way. Because at the moment, I don't think the framework allows for that simultaneous mass system change in the way that we want to see it happen. And I think, something like a place-based approach would obviously, seem to make a lot of sense.
Thanks, Alix. Brett, you've made some really interesting comments in the chat section. Can you, I think it relates to what Alix just said as well, so can you feed in more? I think you're on mute.
Yes, hopefully it's unmuted now. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I used to be quite heavily involved at one time with the EU around the sustainable cities programs and things. And one thing I think that's important, and thinking from previous experience of working on this, it's critical that government actually responds and provides a corporate approach to this, rather than it's a BEIS initiative or it's a DEFRA or Environment Agency, that actually it's done in a coherent, comprehensive way across all the departments. To deliver sustainability requires that, and it constantly fails to do that. And I think this thing about accountability is great. I've been involved in indicators programs for some time, and they always seem to fail. And one of the reasons was they've never been sufficiently resourced or necessarily acknowledged at national government level. So I made reference to the Local Government Management Board Indicators Programme, which was a brilliant programme The local authorities involved engage their communities in identifying indicators that reflect on delivering on sustainability, and it spread right across a whole range of areas from economic development, not just traditional environmental pollution, which everyone was perceiving it was going to do, and it didn't. It went beyond that, and it actually had a proper definition. And the reason why it failed was that it just rested with the then Department of Environment. The Treasury would not accept the other indicator measures. Now I think we've developed a lot further, and Sunak's findings, I think maybe it's the time has come to re-look at that and consider how we address that. And so it's an accountability, but accountability attached to resources. A piece of work that we're currently doing in Coventry, which involves BEIS, Ofgem and Cadent, Western Power in our instance, is looking at the governance for energy supply. And this is that interface between private sector, public sector, and also regulation around how should it be structured in the future. If we're trying to maximize the opportunity for delivery of renewables within a local area and trying to control price and everything else, how do we best go about that? And the current model we have is not going to work. It needs to change, but what should it look like? And I know Oxford as well is doing some work in this area, but these kind of things are things that need to be funded and acknowledged. So we have some support, which is a positive indicator. We have got some funding from government for that, significant level. Some interesting research that's coming out of it, very practical, but it needs to go further than that. And I think it's that kind of thing. There's different models, different cities doing different things, Bristol and Nottingham, in terms of what they're doing. And I think government needs to take those on board and find how it can help, either through legislative change or through the frameworks it's creating in terms of the regulatory bodies and how they work, changing the way that works so that we actually look at it as a whole. And then aligning the resources and the research and intelligence to those activities as well, so that we have a complete coherent package. So we have funding that enables us to pilot things to see how they work, not done by just one department, but actually done in a holistic way, and then that all feeding back. But the critical thing is it's got to involve the local authorities, because this stuff has got to happen at local level if it's ever going to happen. And it's about picking up on the best practice and making sure that that is rolled out. I'm one of the, like others, I'm one of the old lags. I'm amazed the number of times I hear things and think, do you know, we did this 20 years ago, we started something on this. Why are we going back again? Why haven't we not learned the lessons that we had? Why did we let things slip and not continue when we were going down a good course? It's that kind of thing, that consistency of keeping that progress going and maintaining it, and it going beyond the change of government scenario. Was it President Trudeau that once said that there's no lollipops in sustainable development? We've got to find some way that works beyond the 5-year electoral term, that we sign up to stuff that takes us beyond that period, and that we can follow that through. So if a framework that has that kind of alignment would be what would be really helpful, I think, for us.
Thank you, Brett. Louise, do you want to come back to Brett and to Alix?
Yeah, that's really helpful. My brain is whizzing. The place, Alix, the place-based thing is really interesting, and how you align all these different things, different policies that come through from government, and also sort of local conditions and local politics. I mean, can you imagine trying to sort of make all the kids go to the school nearest their house? I mean, you'd have uproar, wouldn't you? I once suggested we didn't drive through the village to the primary school. That caused uproar. But yeah, I think there's almost like a sort of set of gates. I think a project manager would have a sort of a set of gates when you're ready to do a change. It must be a bit like frameworks when you're doing some kind of big IT change, where you've got to line all the ducks up right and then sort of let them go. And different departments in your sort of IT infrastructure might be ready to go at different times. And quite often it's disastrous in IT anyway, isn't it? But that sort of allowing enough people to go forward and then say we've got enough things lined up right that we want to go early and go much more beyond, say, building regs, because we can here. We've done tick, we've got all these things ready, please can we go fast? But then I'm sort of saying please to the government like they're the boss. But and then on Brett's thing, the sort of avoiding slipping back, it's like a sort of some kind of system where you can't slip back. And again, it's sort of like engineering, isn't it? It's sort of something that helps something move in the right way, but sort of props it up and puts in backstops. But that a lot is sort of reliant on funding and skills as well. It's something the Institute for Government had put in, enough scrutiny and enough skills, ratchets, to sort of hold people to account and keep people moving forward. And I think a lot of it sits around embedding those skills as well. And if you do look back when you're feeling despairing, a lot has changed because our attitudes and our norms have shifted. So yeah, oh dear, it's going to be really difficult. Anyway, well, you know, we'll give it a whirl. But that's all those things are things I'm thinking about, but how you do it and examples of where you have done it. So where we don't slip back anymore, where things have really genuinely progressed, there must be fields where that's the case. And that's something I'm going to be looking at. What can we learn from other places? Brett, I'd really like to know what your Coventry energy governance thing is. If you can stick that in the chat, that would be brilliant.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I can arrange for you to meet with colleagues if you like as well to learn about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a big piece. That lack of energy governance is a big issue, yeah. And we talked to Ofgem.
You gave a really good example. Actually, you mentioned HECA, and actually that's a classic example of a slipping back because of the way things have changed, and we haven't moved with the change. So HECA.
Sorry to intervene, Brett, but I think we've run out of time a little bit. Do you mind if we pick this up in another time?
But that's a really useful example, though. Perfect. I can talk about that one later.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to email me, and if I can get you back to test the frameworks in a workshop, that'd be brilliant. I can come back.
Thank you. Apologies for cutting that short. Louise, that was great. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to inputting more. I think one of the roles of the commissions is to provide that kind of continuity over time, including over electoral cycles. So yeah, hopefully that we're something of a backstop there as well at times, at least. But thanks again. That was fantastic. Next up on our agenda, we have Alix from Edinburgh Climate Commission, Edinburgh City Council. So Alix, we're looking forward to hearing from you. I will just share my screen and put your presentation up.
Thank you. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Net Zero Programme Manager at Edinburgh, City of Edinburgh Council, and I'm also Secretariat for the Edinburgh Independent Climate Commission. Yeah, perfect. So I have to leave at around 4 o'clock. So if we run over with lots of questions, I think Jamie in the chat will be brilliant and able to answer all of them. So the Edinburgh Climate Compact is something that has started, been an initiative of the Climate Commission this year, aiming at driving and celebrating ambitious Edinburgh business action to achieve net zero. So I'll just put that into a bit of context. I've assumed that people know nothing, so people can kind of hurry me along if I'm going into too much background detail. So next slide, please. Thank you. So just to put it in a bit of context, in 2020, the first year of the Commission, founded in February of 2020, this work was an integral piece of the puzzle in the annual year plan. So we initially, in fact, before I started in the role, looked at developing a green recovery report and kind of establishing new normals of business practice that we'd like to see going forward. And then ongoing piece of work is the Commission's engagement with the development of a strategy which is being led by the Council. It's the Council's sustainability or net zero strategy, but it's something that needs to be applicable and shared across the whole of the city. And so this is where the Climate Compact really joins both of these areas together, and is a core and essential element, because it's really through connections with the wider business community and the biggest emitters and employers in the city that we're going to really forward impact and activity in this area. So while the Commission can really well use its leverage to influence the Council and ensure that the strategy is ambitious and realistic, the Council itself only emits 3% of the city's emissions. So for all of the work to make more sense and have meaningful change across the city, we need to engage with businesses in a meaningful way. So next slide, please. This kind of work point about how we engage businesses was developed into a kind of climate compact or pledge, taken directly from the words of the compact. The compact is for those organisations who are committed to being leaders in the race to net zero and who are dedicated to moving forward faster together. So the compact itself puts the onus on signatories to take action within their own organisations to contribute to a green recovery and radically reduce the city's emissions. So signatories that sign up are called climate champions and recognised as so and given a status within the city. And at the moment, the compact is only open to those who can demonstrate an existing willing and commitment to change. So we expect all signatories to have some form of climate strategy, or that might just include a wider sustainability strategy and a process for measuring and reporting their emissions. So if they don't have those things in place already, we don't consider them ready to be signatories or climate champions. So if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So we launched in December 2020 with a good amount of coverage and fanfare, which was brilliant. We had, sorry, I'll put my other computer on silence. We had 6 major partners to begin with, and we as the Commission chose individually those members. So we approached people that we felt would have the biggest profile and impact. So we focused on the biggest emitters, the largest employers, and we tried to focus on getting representation across different sectors. Next slide, please. So I'll just talk you through kind of the journey of a climate champion. So there's an expectation that once businesses have read the terms of the compact, which I'll get onto in a minute, and they're willing to and ready to accept those challenges and pledges, they're expected within the first month to make sure they have their current emissions published, that they publicise what they're doing to reduce the climate impact already, and that they complete benchmarking sheets that we provide. In ongoing, we expect them to start delivering on the compact's commitments, contribute to regular blogs and be featured on the Commission's website and elsewhere, and then complete annual benchmarking, which is coordinated by the Secretariat of the Commission, which I'll also talk about a little bit later. Because largely of capacity issues, but also because of the need to really ensure that our champions are leading in this work, there are quarterly meetings, but they're hosted by champions on a rotating basis. We've had real success with that so far. They're meant to collaborate with the Commission on the promotion of net zero, and they're brought together to share best practice with each other. So not only kind of encouraging peers and smaller kind of organizations within their network, but we also have an online team space where they can all talk and chat and share information. Next slide, please. So the text of the compact itself has 4 clear action areas that organizations commit to delivering on when signing the document. But those actions themselves aren't always specific, because we want to make sure that there's space for each organisation to tailor activity to their own particular context. We were very mindful that if we're creating something that's going to fit for, say, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival Society, which is actually a charity, they all have very different capacity and abilities and, you know, areas of impact to focus on than, say, large banking organisations. So the champions commit along the lines of operations, influence and leadership, transport and buildings. I won't run through all of those. You'll probably be familiar with them because they're very, very common areas of focus. And I'll be happy to circulate the text of the document following this if anyone would like to see further. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are our current champions. We have 9 members at the moment. And the NatWest group is a good one because it also kind of includes RBS banking group. And we're growing all the time. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But initially, as I started, when we launched, we were handpicking identified individuals that we wanted to be part of this work. Now we've changed to thinking more broadly about our membership and who we'll include so that we can have as wide a reach as possible. So that brings me on quite nicely to the next slide, which is just a quick summary of our successes and challenges. So in terms of challenges, capacity is obviously an ongoing struggle with everything climate change, I think, at the moment. So setting up something like the commission, the compact, does have a similar, almost similar admin requirements as the commission itself. It has quarterly meetings, it has a membership, and it has ongoing additional kind of interest, both from media and from those wanting to join. So we've had to really think about how we manage that workload, what we're willing to commit to, you know, as supporting agents, and what we expect our membership, so the champions themselves, to take responsibility for. And we've had to work to really streamline an effective process to manage ongoing onboarding. So how do we not bother commissioners all the time, every time we get someone saying they'd be interested in joining, but how do we make sure that commissioners are constantly cited on everything that's happening in this area and making all the decisions? So the next one is around accountability. So that accountability is really for the membership. How do we make sure that by joining the compact, by becoming a climate champion, we're not just giving away free greenwashing opportunities for any business that would like to look a bit more green? So we've really thought about that when we think about how we assess people that want to join. But we also are aware of our own limitations. So we do have limited capacity within the Secretariat of the Commission to monitor whether people are signing up, are doing all of the things they've set out to do. So we've actually introduced a kind of annual kind of update process, which I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail about if people are interested at the end. That was quite a negotiation to work out how we monitored progress, because we also don't want to ask too much for our members. We know that they have a lot of reporting requirements already. And we're also aware that if we ask them for reams of information, whether that's kind of data or kind of softer information, we don't necessarily have the capacity to crunch all those numbers and analyze all that data. So we had to be really mindful of how we think about making sure that our members are accountable for the commitments they've made. Scope slips. So this, as I've mentioned before, we've morphed from being a initial kind of compact that aimed at a number of very defined organizations in the city to having a more open application system. And this decision was really taken, and I think it's a really positive one, because it extends the reach and impact of the compact. It's had way more, I guess, interest and enthusiasm than we were expecting, which is absolutely brilliant. But it's also meant that, you know, it's a challenge when we change and grow our scope. So we've had to be reactive to this and make sure we put some measures in place to avoid further scope slip and really kind of set the terms of reference of what we're doing as the compact. And then the final challenge is really about thinking about, we've targeted those biggest emitters, those people that, you know, have huge budgets and can make massive change. But we as the compact group need to work out, how are we involving smaller, medium-sized enterprises? Do we change the compact? Do we add another layer to the compact, or is this a new area of work that we need to think about? And then the success really is has been brilliant. I think all of us have been really overjoyed at how enthusiastic people have been to join. How keen members have been to take ownership of the work that they're doing. And also it's already been imitated in other cities. So, you know, they say imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Glasgow have mirrored the compact for the city of Glasgow using almost exactly the same text, and you'll see that they've borrowed the title of our Green Recovery Report, if you're familiar with that. So I'll finish there. I know that's a whistle-stop tour, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone wants to dig down into any of that. Yes.
Thank you very much, Alix. We've got a couple of minutes for questions or thoughts and comments. If you could raise your hand in the screen, that would be great to just flag that you're interested. Sam.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations. It's a huge piece of work and a big success, and, you know, really well done. My question, I think I have lots of questions, but I will restrict myself to one, which is about sort of institutional sustainability. How do you make sure that those commitments sort of get embedded, ideally at the senior level in the organizations, and they don't disappear when the person who signed up changes jobs or something like that? Do you have sort of any ideas how you make those commitments really last within the organizations?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, while we have kind of senior people within the organizations that have signed up thinking about how they deliver on a daily basis, we insist that the person that signs the compact is, you know, the most senior person in the organization. So the CEO of NatWest Banking Group is the person that signed, the principal of Edinburgh University is the person that signed. So we really, from the beginning, ensure that we have statements of commitment from the very highest level. And after that, we have had, so I've met with a number of the signatories, because obviously after that, we don't always have the CEO attending every meeting. But the people that I do meet with, they are really keen to talk about how these things are embedded and what support there is out there. I think that's a really challenging question, how we insist and monitor that this is happening, you know, in an ongoing basis. I think that we haven't really cracked that, because I don't know if Jamie wants to come in here at all, but I think we're really hoping that peer pressure has a big role to play in this. When we have quarterly meetings and your organization is set to host, it's really important that you have things to say in that space. And we're using the networks that members are building between them to try and push them to demonstrate their progress to each other and kind of spear each other on. Jamie, is that hand to come in on this, or?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the you know, we've set up the compact and it needs to deliver value to the people who are going to be members of it. We're giving each meeting the members the kind of scope to set their own agenda and lay out their own problems, and then draw on the expertise of the others, so that the problems that they bring to the, shouldn't make it all about problems, but the challenges and the opportunities that they bring to the table are shared across a set of organisations across the city, which, as all of you know, is the only way we're going to tackle a problem that's as big as climate change.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Gideon, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, just a quick one. We've sort of got a commitment from the council for a charter, and I wonder if there's a difference between the charter and the compact. It'd be interesting to know what your thoughts are. It sounds like, you know, maybe you've got a model there that we could follow quite closely.
Sorry, what is the charter, Gideon?
It's a business charter, well, an organisation's charter that they're going to commit to the net zero targets, and they're going to follow taking action on that. So I suppose like the compact seems more than that, certainly, but there seems to be elements of that, and I quite like the idea of the compact.
Yeah,
Thanks,
well,
Gideon. Alex, that's from Kirklees Climate Commission as well. So go ahead.
I'd be very happy to have that conversation with you in more detail if you want to compare what you're doing and what the compact's doing. I guess one of the things that also kind of answers the last question is that the compact, by being so public, creates accountability for those commitments to be followed through on, because, you know, if you're a large banking group and you've made these claims very publicly to lots of fanfare, we're kind of hoping that the press will monitor this. We're hoping that the press will go, you signed up to the compact and you're not doing enough stuff. So I wonder if that could be an extra element to, I don't know enough about the pledge, the compact that you said that you have, but I think there is a benefit to putting it under the spotlight of public scrutiny, you know, and using, you know, both peer pressure and public pressure to kind of keep these things alive. In terms of being a bit more, I think the more might be, you know, the benchmarking, the annual kind of monitoring that we have. That is very light touch. We allow people to, we state in that we don't expect that you'll be able to answer, or that you have to answer all of these questions, but there are a number of mandatory questions. And I think the way that really works is it helps those organizations feel a bit anxious about them. They feel like they've got something to report on, and that's great. We want them to think we're being checked up on, and they are. We don't have the capacity to analyze every bit of data they give us, or check that the carbon emissions they're reporting are completely right with everything else they're doing. But I think the idea that they're being looked at has definitely spurned a lot of reaction, which has been quite good to see.
No, thank you.
Alex. I think there are a few other hands up. I'm really sorry, but we're running a little bit behind time. I wonder if you could post your comments or questions, and we can feed them onto Alex and put you in touch directly. Forgive me for that. I'm aware that Candice has a time limit too. Alex, thank you so much, and to Jamie as well. It's great work, and I think there's a lot for the other commissions to learn from what you've done there. So fantastic stuff. Thank you, and thanks for your time today as well.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care. So our next speaker today is Candice Howarth, who's a core part of the PCAN team, and Candice is going to feed back on our recent PCAN report, which is looking at trends in local climate action, which I think has some overlap with the presentation from Louise earlier. So Candice, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Andy. And thanks very much for the invitation to present the report. I'm going to try and share my screen. Can I just check, can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate I don't have a huge amount of time. I also appreciate a few people may have seen some of this presentation, but ultimately what I wanted to do here was to just give a very quick overview of the report that PCAN published back in March, which gives essentially a picture of what's happening at the local level on climate action. The link to the report is down in this slide, but I expect, I think actually the details were in the email that was sent to everyone. So what I'll do is I'll try and give a brief overview of the report. Do have a look at the report itself. We have a policy summary. We also have a database on there of all the climate emergency declarations across the UK. We're inviting people to have a look at that data set. And if they spot any errors or any gaps, or if an area that we noted hadn't declared and has declared since, then please do let us know. But as a bit of context, as you'll all know, this is one of the reasons that we're all here together. There is widespread recognition that there's a global emergency, and the UNDP and Oxford University People's Vote that was published earlier this year showed that over 60% of people worldwide recognize this, and that there's a real need to do more to address the issue. And what we found, and in a lot of the work that everyone on this call is doing, is that although climate change is a global problem, a lot of it requires strong action at the local level. And it's really exciting to see all the energy that is being galvanized at the local level and has been doing so for a number of years. And this is what the report was focusing on. And some of the key points that came out of the report, well, 3 out of 4 of UK local authorities have declared an emergency. So that's about just under 80%, but only 62% have produced a new or a refreshed climate action plan. So we still have just under 40% of local authorities that they may be doing things behind the scenes, but we couldn't find evidence of a new or a refreshed climate action plans that would reflect their declaration. And as I'm sure many of you know, and what we've been hearing is that the overwhelming focus of local climate action is very much on mitigation. And our analysis showed that just under 12% of climate emergency declarations mention adaptation. And when I say mention, it could even be just one word in some instances. So we are seeing this imbalance of effort towards mitigation as opposed to adaptation. And this is quite interesting, particularly considering that managing the physical risks of climate change is particularly relevant to the local level. So this is driving some of the work that we're doing in PCAN. And another aspect of the report was looking at the different styles of experimentation and the different and new approaches to local climate action that we're seeing. So we've spoken about city commissions. So the Edinburgh has a city commission. We have one in Belfast and Leeds. But we're also seeing different networks, partnerships, and the work of climate assemblies and climate juries. So a whole plethora of tools that are being used to galvanize this action at the local level. And we're seeing that this isn't just about climate change. It's very, very much broader than that. And we're seeing a lot of the local actors that are keen to combine climate action with other strategies that also tackle social inequalities, social justice, that promote economic regeneration and so forth. So the report that we've produced, which was produced over a number of months and involved a lot of effort from a lot of people, it brings together an analysis of different aspects and different components, such as looking at climate emergency declarations, drawing on projects that the network has funded itself, looking at what are the different democratic deliberative processes, what is the role of local finance, and bringing together different types of data. So not just desk-based review, but we conducted some interviews and a few case studies of local authorities. Now, in terms of what's been happening at the local level, you'll recognise that this is the same figure that Louise used in her report as well. It's a great figure. Needs to be updated slightly, but it provides a really good picture of what's happening across the UK in terms of the areas that are declaring emergencies and the different targets that they are initiating around reducing their emissions. And like I mentioned earlier, although we are seeing this burst or the sustained energy around climate action, a third of councils still haven't published a new or a refreshed plan on climate action. So we're really keen to see how that evolves over the next few months and years. And some of the key barriers that we've already mentioned in the call today really resonate with what we found in our research. So some of these are very much around lack of capacity and expertise at the local level, limited and stretched funding, and the impact of national policy, which could actually be limiting in some cases local action. what we also saw is that we're seeing very little coordination between the local and the national levels. And in England and Northern Ireland, for example, there doesn't seem to be a concrete plan outlining the role of local authorities in delivering net zero, although this is happening on the ground. And something also that we picked up on, which has been discussed again today, is around data. So we did identify some significant gaps and limitations when it came to accessing data, but also the availability of data. The way it's assembled can sometimes be quite opaque and quite difficult to decipher. And relating back to the point I made about adaptation, data on adaptation is a lot less available than, say, data on carbon emissions and mitigation. So that's something that we thought was quite an interesting feature in the work that we did. Now, just quickly to delve a little bit more into the climate emergency declaration work, this particular analysis doesn't feature directly in our report, but it's linked to some research that we're doing. And just to give you a flavour of some of the motivations and the purpose of the declarations that are made, some of the research that we're still conducting at the moment shows the way in which these climate emergency declarations actually came about. So some, for example, came actively from above, which was very much linked to the senior ranks of power at a local level, or it may have been more passively from above or below. And actually the most common way in which a declaration was made was often found to be linked to local activism and local civil organisation pressure. So there's a really interesting trend there. And in terms of what they set out to do, many of these declarations are statements of intent. So they intend to demonstrate more ambition on climate change. We saw a lot of similarities and potentially the suggestion that a template has been used in these declarations to show that they recognise the current state of the science on climate change, the need for action, and talking about net zero targets. So they've also been a really useful way to stimulate local action and to bring together different local actors, and in some cases have also been seen as a political gesture. Now, some of the processes that we looked at in the report, I do urge you to have a look. There's some really great case studies in there from both our own research that has been funded by PCAN, but also just looking at what's happening across the UK and more broadly. Everyone is aware of this, that there are a range of different non-governmental community-focused networks that aim to galvanise local climate action. And these exist obviously within the UK, but also at the international level as well. And a lot of the work that we do is very much centred around our core climate city commissions, as I mentioned earlier, and as you'll all know, in Belfast, Edinburgh and Leeds. But obviously that network is growing considerably, and we're seeing new commissions, new partnerships forming, new networks coming together that are either independent, they're led by local authorities, or they're led by third sectors. So there's a real energy and a real diversity of the types of groups and networks that are being formed out there. And another aspect that we looked at, and this actually formed part of some of the PCAN funded projects, was looking at participatory governance. So we've seen a lot of citizen juries and assemblies over the last couple of years, which are increasingly popular on climate change. And we also had the National Assembly, which was held last year. And many of them also run around the country. But often one of the main limitations to running these processes, no matter how beneficial they can be, is the funding. And one of the core aspects that has been explored in some research is that one of the limitations is that there often isn't funding available as part of the process to evaluate the impact that it has. But they are really important, these processes, to help provide a social mandate for ambitious climate action, and they help gauge the public's temperature in terms of their interest and their support for climate policies. So that they're a really good way of painting that picture and providing a awareness of what is a fair, trusted and transparent process for deliberation. And it enables members of the public who may not necessarily be reached by other traditional forms to be engaged with when it comes to climate policy. Another core feature of the report resonates with some of the work that we do on finance and business engagements across the PCAN network. And although there's, again, a lot of work happening on local finance, we found that there is severe underinvestment in local climate action. And particularly, there doesn't seem to be an adequate development of a project pipeline to develop and to drive local climate action. And there seems to be an inability to tap into local pools of savings to help fund different activities at the local level. And relating back to a point I made earlier about adaptation, the majority of the funding or climate finance that is available seems to be focused on delivering decarbonisation targets, and there really is a lack of investment in adaptation. And while we're seeing this slow increase in activities around finance, there is more happening at the national level. We have the new National Infrastructure Bank, which is being established, and the government has also issued it will issue its first green sovereign bond this year, which would help channel some of those private savings into climate action and green jobs across the country. But when we talk about business engagement, we don't necessarily mean the big key players. We've also seen a lot of really interesting and fascinating engagement and support by eco or green companies at the local level, and they may include private sector representatives such as, for example, electricity providers, but we're also seeing football clubs, housing associations, excuse me, television companies, opera companies. So there's a real range of exciting and diverse actors that are really keen to play a role in this space going forward. So quickly, just to summarize some of the recommendations that we make in the report, and I think these chime quite well with what was in Louise's report and another report by the Green Alliance. And we frame these to target them towards local authorities, local climate communities, and then the national government and devolved administrations. Now, very quickly to summarize, when it comes to local authorities and local communities, we're encouraging them to follow up on their climate emergency declarations and really sort of building in that local support with an evidence base that supports and helps deliver climate action plans. And we're really keen to see that these plans tackle both mitigation and adaptation. There's an understanding as to why mitigation has been a predominant focus up until now, but they do really need to go hand in hand now. And as part of that, it's really key to continue ensuring that other broader socio-economic issues are considered as part of climate action plans and in a post-COVID recovery. So we really want the climate emergency narrative to remain as valuable as it has been up until now and to really build on the energy. And another aspect that we emphasize is really the importance, as has already been mentioned in today's call, the importance of collaboration and partnership-based approaches to local climate action. These really help mobilize the energy and the expertise of the different range of actors that we're seeing at the local level, and that can help facilitate different mechanisms to deliver climate action. When it comes to local authorities, we're encouraging them to develop more climate finance strategies to help mobilize local savings, to really look at the role of the local scale in helping to finance some of the climate action solutions we want to see going forward. And when it comes to the national government and devolved administrations, we heard from local authorities that we spoke to and from the research that we did that there's a real need for recognition and for leveraging of both the agency and power of local communities in local climate action. I mean, local climate action really is recognized as a key channel for the delivery of national policies, but it really needs to be better recognized at the national level. And very much echoing some of Louise's work, that there needs to be this framework that can help support local climate action, which focuses on climate action, but also considers other broader issues that are relevant to the just transition. And then finally, just to wrap up really and to summarize, where we've seen a lot of action at the local level with local authorities, it's very much been in a collaborative manner in most instances, which has been really encouraging. And it's really engaged with a range of different actors at the local level, whether that's citizens, businesses, or other actors. So we're seeing much more participation and engagement with new and different actors. But overall, there seems to be a bit of a lack of ambition of how local authorities will deliver on their targets. So we're really keen to see, following all of these declarations that have been made, what will happen, and particularly what will happen on adaptation, to make sure that is part of the picture. So I think I'll stop there, as I appreciate we're running out of time. But thanks again very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Candice. That was fantastic. Any thoughts, comments, questions? think there's a lot of resonance with what Louise was saying earlier. And, you know, we in a way, through this report, you know, took the current status and looked at the impact of the structures or the lack of them that Louise was mentioning. I don't know whether there's a significant level of variation across the UK, for example, whether the situation in England is different from in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland. Did that come up in the statistics and the review of activities that you saw?
It did to some extent. I mean, we're seeing different forms of ambitions and different types of activities that are being conducted across the different regions. Off the top of my head, I can't quite remember, but I know we have John on the line and Jamie too, but I certainly, in terms of the climate emergency declaration work that we saw, that there seems to be quite a standard approach to how these declarations are being made. And similarly, in terms of what happens after these declarations are made, we're seeing a lot of questions being asked in terms of what happens next. So a declaration is made, but not as much is known as to what to then do. So I think it's about 60% of existing climate or sustainability or environment plans have been updated, but some of them have only been updated only slightly, and others are very much focusing on either decarbonisation as opposed to mitigation. And we're seeing these evolving as time goes on.
Thanks, Candice. Johnny.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Candice. I thought that was fascinating. Some really great insights in there. Quick question. Did you look into whether or not local authorities were setting science-based targets? And if you did, what did you find?
We didn't go to that level of granularity, I have to admit, but we did, in looking at the declarations, I have to say that, like I mentioned earlier, there seemed to be some sort of a template. So the science is referred to in terms of the IPCC report, but in terms of science-based targets, I think I'd probably divert back to you, Andy, in terms of the roadmaps, which in some places have been adopted, the carbon roadmaps, and they're very much based on science in the development of their targets.
Yes, exactly. They are. I'm not sure what proportion of either the climate emergency declarations or the action plans are based on any kind of science-based analysis. I would imagine, I'm going to guess it's what, half, maybe less? I don't know. What would you think, Johnny?
Yeah, I'd expect so. I mean, a lot of them, you know, they establish most of them establish a 2030 net zero target, but this ranges from 2025 up until 2050 to align with the UK target. I would say the proportion is pretty low in terms of that being based in science, which is what we're seeing in terms of the questions they're asking as to how to actually deliver this now.
Johnny, do you want to come back on that?
I was just going to make a really quick point. I mean, I think the climate emergency declarations have been really helpful kind of catalysts, certainly for those local authorities who perhaps weren't in this space. But I think I've been really taken by the race to zero and the extent to which the UN and UK government have been able to actually create a much more coherent framework for consistent global action. So certainly from a Manchester point of view, we're big advocates for the race to zero, because it means that you know, if you sign up to that as a city, as a business, as an investor, as a university, you're signing up to something which has got some global consistency and which is aligned with the Paris Agreement. So yeah, very much encourage that for colleagues on the line.
Thank you. Louise.
Yeah, I was going to say some have used the Tyndall budgets. Ed Gorman's just put a note about that in the chat. For Greater Manchester, it was the Tyndall, it was a combination of Tyndall and then what was possible through Scatter, sort of working backwards, looking at emissions cuts through different ambition levels and existing data, not new possibilities, which was not a fault in Scatter, but you know, you can't measure what you don't know yet. But a lot of people I interviewed, sort of, when I said, why did you choose that target? They went, oh, we just did, you know, and it was like, well, give it a whirl, you know. And actually, you can get really stuck on it, and you can sort of get held up by it too. So there's that sort of set of choose the target, and then ideally it'll be science-based, but then you can't be held back by your lack of data either, and you've got to go for sort of good enough data, but sort of not too risky action. So there's a bit of a fight there in how much you hold up whilst till you know you're right. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. So yeah, it's a real mix.
Absolutely, thanks, Louise. Thank you very much, Candice, for that. I think one of the main things for this meeting is the flagging up of the lack of emphasis on adaptation and resilience. And we're hoping that the next version of this meeting will help to address that to some extent at least. So yeah, that's a really valid observation and important one too. So thank you again, Candice, for your contribution. So next up, we have a presentation from Adrian Gault and Adrian Cannard from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough on a new climate commission, which we're thrilled to see launched, and very happy that it will be linked into the PCAN network. So Adrian, very much looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think Adrian C is going to lead on this presentation.
Okay, perfect.
And following that previous debate, delighted to be here, and this is our race to science-based targets to mash together badly two concepts that we've just been talking about. So I'm conscious of time, so I will rush through a presentation setting a little bit about our commission and what we're trying to achieve. I'm the strategic planning manager for the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, who's been leading on this from the authority side, and Adrian we brought in to assist us in getting from a pretty much a standing start to what we think is a really impressive piece of work, which is still ongoing, and I'll go through that. So the first challenge is to share the screen. If everyone can see that.
It says you started screen sharing, but I can't. There it goes. So great.
Okay, a bit slow there. So yes, just in terms of introduction to our area, a very poor map there, but basically we have a number of authorities covering unitary, district, county, and then bringing them all together is the combined authority. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is two medium-sized cities, lots of market towns, and in a very extensive rural area. And contrary to maybe some perceptions, we're a mix of both very prosperous areas, but also some very deprived areas. And we have some of the highest and lowest areas in the country in terms of the sort of index of multiple deprivation. 5 of our authorities have declared climate emergencies and 2 haven't. And I'll come back a bit on that later. But last year we launched the Independent Commission, and we were very lucky that we managed to get Baroness Brown to head up our commission, which brought a wealth of knowledge of what the National Committee was up to. And we assembled a range of commissioners covering business interests, society interests, the environment, and the financial sector to start looking at this. And as I said, we commissioned Adrian to support us, and then had a number of reports, of which PCAN provided one of those. We also had a process where we went out to the residents and businesses of our area as part of the route, and that was interesting because we did a survey which was sort of self-selecting, anyone could respond to, but to make sure we had a sort of more I guess representative approach, we also used the survey company approach to target, and we actually had different results from those two, as you perhaps might expect, with the sort of self-selecting anyone could respond being perhaps more pro climate action and more awareness. I think we're more motivated to respond. So that was an interesting aspect that we did. So to sort of help us along the way, we had two reports. So one was from Cambridge University looking at risks, climate change risks, so that we had a decent baseline of what that might mean. And that sort of harks back to the point about adaptation and knowing what was going to happen anyway. And then also we worked with Andy and the team to apply that methodology of PCAN to the roadmap methodology to look at the interventions that were most cost effective and most carbon effective, and how those interacted. So that underpinned our work. And then in terms of the risk, I'm sure you've seen these are national maps taken from the commission, the National Committee, but we're down in the east of England, and as you can see, real issues there around temperature increases and the impact on what is already a water stressed region. We conversely are also highly exposed to flooding, both from tidal flooding, but also surface water being a relatively flat, and about a third of our area is drained through all the canals and pumping system to support the fens agricultural output. And what the work found was I guess alarming for our area, was that our emissions are above the UK average quite significantly, about 25%, but also falling more slowly. So we're making less progress than other areas. And some of that is the nature of the geography, being the significantly large rural area. There's a lot of transport emissions. We're also crossed by some major arteries in terms of the flow of goods from the East Coast ports to the Midlands and beyond. And also, I think the challenges around some of the less carbon intensive modes of introducing them. So we have some very ambitious plans around a mass transit system coming forward in our area, but we don't currently have that, and the population density is much less. So we've got some really interesting challenges, and partly that's why we wanted the Commission to undertake this sort of evidence-based approach, so that we had a set of recommendations that were specific to Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and that was very much a desire from the Combined Authority leadership that we understood our area. And in terms of the speed or the challenge, so in terms of the global carbon budget and our share of it, what you can't see under the top of the screen is that I think we've got about 6 years left. And so that business as usual compared to science-based target is really challenging in terms of action that's needed in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I've got a note there that this excludes peat, and we've got an ongoing debate with the scientists and with government and with our farmers around, first of all, what are the emissions from peat, and also how much peat we've actually got left in our area. So we, as part of the Commission's work, have actually funded some work with farmers around understanding from their perspective peat levels in our area. But it's just a very specific local challenge, but actually if you include them, then that could be a third or 50% of all the emissions that we do on top. So it goes from seeming a very niche thing to being actually crucial to our area. So we're very keen to explore that issue with government and locally. And then as you've probably seen from the other work that Andy's done for your areas, we had the sort of methodology of what were cost-effective measures applied to our area. This is a table drawn from the buildings section, but you know, as you'd expect, a lot of it's about improving efficiency and the huge challenge of introducing new heating sources to our building stock. And also the work from Andy shows that although on the industry side, we're not the sort of, we don't have heavy industry in our area particularly, but you know, in line with other areas, there's only so far you can go with industry in terms of reducing emissions, and therefore we need to think about other ways of reducing and compensating for that. Huge task ahead of us. So, you know, we've got 500,000 cars registered in our area. Half our buildings are below, you know, sort of a pretty average level of energy efficiency. So almost none of them are on low carbon heat at the moment. So that's 1/3 of 1 million homes to somehow move on to low carbon. We're a very growth focused area, and Peterborough and Cambridge as cities quite often top the sort of most built homes, along with Milton Keynes and some other places. So we've got a huge amount of new stock coming, which we need to get right and not add to our problems of the future. And Andy's work suggested that we could be looking at a combined public-private investment need of over 700 million per annum over the next 10 years. Now that obviously also reflects the sort of natural cycle of investment that people are making as infrastructure and buildings and cars, you know, comes to end of useful life. But it also includes additional measures that we will need to take. So the Commission looked at a number of areas in detail this time, and comes back to the point that was made about data. So we particularly focused on transport, buildings and energy, along with the peat issue, because we had the best baseline to start with, along with some overarching recommendations. So we've had a first report with some recommendations under those topics, and the Commission's going to carry on over the summer to pick up a number of other topics. And I won't go through all the recommendations. We've sent the link to the report, but I've just pulled out some of the sort of high level things around buildings here. And just going right back to the beginning of this afternoon, the comment about energy planning, that sort of come out strongly. So I'm pleased that we're aligning with that. The sort of challenge around energy efficiency, our growth agenda, and also, I don't think it's come up, but the sort of enforcing of things once you've agreed them, and the capacity, particularly in local government, to sort of check up on lots of things that have purport to have been done, and how they carry on in the future. In terms of governance and feedback directly to the combined authority, there are a number of recommendations there, sort of reflecting where we are as a group of authorities. So a strong recommendation, and Louise will, hopefully these will be ticking down your list of things that you've recommended, but you know, strong leadership, that we should bring together the key players, that we ought to have capacity within the authority to support this, that we will come back with an actual action plan, which is about targets and science-based, with monitoring, and that we look at green investment and how we can be, I guess, clever about getting more investment. It's not just about the public purse, it's about the demand from the business sectors we've heard to sort of change, and they're under pressure from their consumers, if nothing else. And how we might lead a programme around engagement and behaviour change. And as you'd expect, the Commission found, you know, and raised the same point that, you know, 2/3 of this is down to behaviour change and the need for everyone to act. And I think that's the real challenge of moving from some of the bigger chunky things that you can do to a whole system change, which we're going to have to deal with. The other thing that the Commission wanted to do was not to lose our residents and businesses as we went along. And so there's a whole chapter which basically tries to signpost people to things that they can do immediately. So when they read the report, you know, rather than it be, well, that's a sort of huge challenge for local government and businesses, we've actually got things in there where we say you can immediately go and turn down your heating, for example, think about your behaviours straight away. And as I said, we're still carrying on, and so we're going to pick up the role of nature. So we did highlight nature-based solutions, but we can do more on it. Thankfully, we've got adaptation there, so we can at least say that we are thinking about that. Water, waste, business, industry, innovation, and picking up on the thing about who has declared climate emergencies and who hasn't. A big piece around a just transition and the costs. So we do have areas that are very concerned about viability, about impact on growth, about what happens for the infrastructure that they need in their area. So those sort of political concerns are underpinning some of this. And I think that's a really key message that we're going to have to deal with going forward. And finally, how we take the public forward with us on this. A bit of a rush through there. Adrian, did you want to add anything that I might have missed in our summary?
I think it's a very thorough summary. I think I would just add that given Baroness Brown was kind of chair, and given my background, we probably did put quite a lot of emphasis in looking at what the Committee on Climate Change had recommended nationally, and looked at Louise's work as well, and kind of using that as a baseline for saying, well, this is what's required nationally, so what does that mean is required given the circumstances in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. I think one of the big things, as Adrian says, that we've got going forward is these differences across the authorities, which are actually quite marked, both in terms of social issues, but also transport issues, which are quite different, and thinking about how that plays through in terms of the actions and the acceptability of the actions.
Thank you so much, both of you. That's really, really interesting. Great to see the Commission come into such sharp focus so quickly. It's really impressive. I think that the range of activities around, well, that are feeding into the report that's coming in September, I think you said, is really good. And yeah, great to have another Commission joining with the growing number that's in the network. So are there any thoughts, questions, comments from everyone else on the call? Sam.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. My question is about the sort of knowledge base that you have. Adrian, you commented, Adrian C, you know, your sort of slides were confidently full of numbers, as if you knew everything about the region, which is in slight contrast to, you know, what we hear from other parts of the country where we struggle to know what's actually going on regionally and locally. I wonder whether you were just more cavalier about it, or whether you were particularly good at collecting data, or yeah, could you comment on how much you really know about all your sort of numbers?
I think there's a mix there. I'm sure I'm cavalier in some of them. So just as a bit of background, before we started the Commission, we actually had a piece of work that had been done by Cambridge University. They have a policy unit that pick up different topics in terms of postgrads, and they'd actually done a piece of work looking at some of the basic data around emissions, and actually explored some things in a fair bit of detail. So just as an example, Peterborough has a very high number of electric vehicles registered, but that's because we have a couple of rental companies who are registered there, and so all the cars are registered in Peterborough. They don't actually show that Peterborough is the highlight of electric car ownership, sadly. So we did have a really good bit of evidence base there, which we have supplemented through the work that Andy's done, and the university's followed up. I think it's fair to say we have applied a methodology, and so you know, it's applying to some statistics around our residents, our buildings, etc. So I totally accept we do not know everything on that, but I think it was enough to give us a good enough grounding to get political will to move forward on action. And I think that's the key thing here, is that you know, whether we're right on some of the targets or not, we actually wanted to make sure we had a good enough position that we could make some decisions on. And I think, you know, we'll continue to delve into individual bits as we develop the action plans.
I would say, if I add that, I think it is very variable, Sam, in terms of the data. Yeah, and Adrian's right, that in terms of the transport area, we had enough data to be very clear that emissions in the area are higher than the national average. And it's probably due to a combination of cars and vans and HGVs, but actually narrowing that down and getting the data really, you know, better on the precise contributions was extremely difficult. But we do have good data that tells us that Fenland has the lowest level of electric charging points in the country, whereas Cambridgeshire and South Cambridgeshire, which are relatively wealthy areas, are pretty good for those. So we had those kinds of signals, quite big variations across the area.
That's actually quite encouraging. So there are sort of pockets of data, and if you have access to cheap labor in the form of students, you can improve it. So that's actually, that's for me, that's a good message.
Absolutely. I mean, the data landscape is slowly evolving across the UK, I think, but there are still big gaps and major inconsistencies, and often a time delay as well. So yeah, it would be great to see that as a focal point, because it underpins so much other activity, of course. Any other questions quickly? Gideon.
Yeah, just a quick one. Given the area, I was born in Cambridge, so I have a little bit of an idea of where you are. How much of is taken into consideration for agriculture around there? Because we in Kirklees have a big agricultural sector.
So it's been a big feature of the first phase, but mostly focused around the sort of peat issue, which isn't the whole of the agricultural importance of our area, but is massive in terms of a national contribution. So we had one of our commissioners is a global agricultural company that's based in the Fens. So we certainly had expert advice and challenge, I think, from the industry, which is good. We didn't just sort of have one side of the agenda. We had a real robust debate around that, and it's certainly something that we see we need to pick up more in terms of adaptation going forward. And the sort of message coming back was that there were opportunities as well as threats, and so we have a number of trials of farming methods underway for lower emissions and sort of regenerative farming, which could feed in to the debate. I think it was quite consumed to some extent by the sort of challenge of the peat and re-wetting versus, you know, the agricultural output. And I think that's a topic we'll come back to, no doubt, as we move into the action plan.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I think that land use and land use change in agriculture and forestry are generally lacking or underdeveloped in many of the other, or almost all of the other action plans that I've seen. So yeah, what you're doing there, I think, could be significant for all of us. So perhaps at some point we could ask to have you back and hear more about what you're doing and thinking in that area, or discuss it more broadly, including with NFU. So Kate Adams has just posted something there which is highly relevant. So thank you very much. That was really good.